Podcast. All right, we are live to attendees, and folks should be coming in.
Okay, I see some people coming in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to tonight's event. This is the Curator Tour of Labor of Love, hosted by the GLBT Historical Society. My name is Terry Beswick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Society, and I'm here to introduce tonight's event before I turn it over to our three illustrious curators. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our staff, Nalini Elias, the Curator of Exhibitions for the Society, and Lee Pfeffer, Museum Operations Manager, for putting together tonight's event. Without Nalini, we would not have such wonderful exhibitions going up on our website like this one, and without Lee, we would not have such a great lineup of informative events like this one, so I'm really grateful for their participation in our work. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be posted on our website. So many of you will be also watching on live stream on Facebook, and we welcome everyone. If you were watching with us on Zoom, welcome. And we will enjoy your active participation in the forum. So please post any comments in the little chat. If you just hover down below, you'll see the little chat box, and you can click in there at any time. The panelists, you guys can do that as well. If you want to post any links or resources or responses to any of the chats. And if you have any questions for any of the panelists tonight, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And Lee is off screen, but will be assisting the panelists in fielding your questions. So please pepper us, don't wait, have something to say, throw it in there. So with that, I want to introduce the Society and then tonight's event. So the GLBT Historical Society was founded in 1985. We're recognized internationally as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. Our mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. Our operations are centered around two sites: the GLBT Historical Society Museum, located since 2011 in the heart of San Francisco's Castro neighborhood, and the John P. DiCecco Archives and Research Center in the Mid-Market District. Although our physical locations are expected to remain closed at least through mid-August due to the pandemic, please check out our growing array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources at glbthistory.org. And finally, I want to thank all our members and donors who make all our work possible. If you're not already a card-carrying member of the GLBT Historical Society, please consider joining today if you are able. And members get some great little discounts, including a 20% discount, or benefits, including a 20% discount on our online store, where you can buy t-shirts and posters featuring some of the images used in the Labor of Love exhibition that we're going to be looking at tonight. So please check that out. So tonight, we are here for a very special event. I'm excited about this. It's a curatorial tour and behind-the-scenes look at one of our most recent exhibitions online, Labor of Love, The Birth of San Francisco Pride, 1970 through 1980. The exhibition's co-curators, Gerard Koskovich, Don Romesburg, and Amy Sueyoshi, will lead a special guided tour of the exhibition, explaining their curatorial choices and demonstrating how San Francisco's LGBTQ community forged the internationally renowned annual celebration, which has come to be known as Pride. So with that, I'm going to introduce our three speakers and then turn it over to Gerard. So Amy is Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. She's a historian by training. Her research lies at the intersection of Asian American studies and sexuality studies. She has authored 2 books, Queer Compulsions, Race, Nation, and Sexuality in the Affairs of Yone Noguchi in 2012, and Discriminating Sex, White Leisure and the Making of the American Oriental in 2018. Sueyoshi has been a founding curator of the GLBT Historical Society Museum and served as co-chair of the inaugural Queer History Conference 2019, hosted by the Committee on LGBT History. It's nice to see you, Amy. Thanks for being here. And Gerard Koskovich, he's a San Francisco historian and rare book dealer, a founding member of the GLBT Historical Society. He has been active in the movement to create LGBTQ archives and museums for nearly 4 decades. and has curated numerous exhibitions. Gerard has presented widely, including talks at the, here we go again, the École, oh, you're gonna fix it later anyway. Okay, I'm going Italian now. École del Louvre. See, I try. Kyoto University and the Oxford University, and has published extensively in English and French. Most recently, he has focused on the work of Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld and the history of queer history in the United States and LGBTQ place-based history. Thanks for bearing with me through this. Don Rumsberg, good to see you, Don. Don is a professor of women's and gender studies at Sonoma State University and is a co-founder of the GLBT Historical Society Museum. He is an editor of the Routledge History of Queer America in 2018 and has published queer takes on public history, histories of adolescence, sex work, transracial adoption, and queer trans performers. He was the lead scholar working to bring LGBTQ content into the California's K-12 history social science framework and textbooks, and now trains educators on implementation. Where's my report on this, by the way? I'm waiting for that. No, I'm kidding. For these efforts, he is the namesake of the Committee on LGBT History's John Romesburg Prize for K-12 curriculum. So you guys, really a pleasure to have you all here with us tonight. And with that, I'm gonna hop off and watch the live stream on Facebook. Enjoy, have fun, have a great weekend, wash your hands, stay safe, wear a mask, except on this, of course. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much, Terry. So I'm gonna jump in and do a brief introduction and then pass along to Don and Amy to provide some further introductory remarks. So let me just say that Labor of Love, The Birth of San Francisco Pride, 1970 to 1980, is an exhibition that Amy and Don and I worked on. And of course, we started planning it knowing that this year was the 50th anniversary of San Francisco Pride. San Francisco is one of the 4 cities anywhere in the world to hold a Pride celebration in 1970 to mark the first anniversary of Stonewall. And we were the second one out of the gate. First came Chicago, then San Francisco, then the following day, New York and Los Angeles. And of course, this is an exceptional year because the parade and exhibition were canceled, the parade and celebration were canceled for the first time in their 50-year history due to the coronavirus pandemic. And ordinarily, we would have expected 1 million people at least to attend. That's been normal since circa 2000, and given the anniversary, it probably would have been more like 2 million. So given its half-century existence and its exceptional status as one of the largest and most visible annual gatherings of LGBTQ people and our allies anywhere in the world, Pride can sometimes seem like an inevitable part of San Francisco's political, economic, and cultural landscape. Although this year, as we've seen, some things can make it not inevitable, and the exhibition, I think, will help us understand more its malleability. Labor of Love gives us a chance to look back at the birth and early growth of this institution. And at its core, the exhibition reminds us that pride isn't a given. It emerged from a constantly shifting mix of hope and desire, struggle and celebration, forces that remain very much central to pride today. And in Labor of Love, we hear echoes of history in debates about pride that will be familiar to many of us who have marched or watched or joined the celebrations at the end of June in San Francisco and in many other places anytime in recent history. Forces that emerged in those first 10 years that we look at in the exhibition have continued to shape the event into the present and are evident even in the intersectional protest marches that happened in place of the traditional Pride celebration just last month in San Francisco and again in many other cities. Amy and Don and I collaborated on researching and conceiving Labor of Love, working for more than a year to bring together the exhibition that you'll have a chance to see online. Each of us took the lead on various sections within the exhibition and then worked together providing extensive feedback revisions to really bring the whole thing together with the assistance of each of our co-curators. So I'll now hand off for some initial observations from my colleagues. Don will start by describing a bit how we put the exhibition together and what models of historical knowledge production the exhibition reflects. Amy will discuss some of what we see as the purposes of this exhibition, and then we'll pass along to each of us to highlight a few selected objects from the sections that we were responsible for. At the end, Amy and Don will sum things up a bit, and then finally we'll open the floor to questions, comments, memories from the participants in this evening's event. And we're particularly keen to hear from all of you what you remember about the first decade of the parade if you were there, what you think about the exhibition if you've had a chance to see it already, and after thinking a bit about the history that we'll be presenting this evening, what you see as the future of Pride. What might it become? What would you like it to become? And we hope to have a very lively conversation around those questions once we're done presenting. So now I'll hand along to Don and then to Amy.
Great, thank you. I feel like with this headset, I'm like a sports, this is as close I get to being a sports, I don't even know what they're called, reporter, as I'll ever be. So yeah, so we, that was a great summary of sort of what San Francisco Pride has been from its inception and the ways in which we are sort of grappling with what it means in our present. We, I think all three of us approached this really thinking about Pride is something that we've sometimes engaged more directly with in our long lives here in San Francisco, sometimes more indirectly with, sometimes with more enthusiasm, sometimes with less enthusiasm. And what we didn't want this exhibit to be was just a celebration of Pride, an uncritical celebration of Pride. One of the things that the GLBT Historical Society's museum does very well is to take a critical lens where we really look at our community's history and think about the ways in which it isn't just a site for celebration, although certainly we are cheerleaders of our history, right? But also a place to critically engage with the places where there are tensions and exclusions and marginalizations and the kinds of larger social forces that shape the possibilities of what our community can do and the kinds of things that we struggle to do and to overcome. And so I remember all of us kind of sitting in, I think it was a wine bar in the Castro and talking about this exhibit long before we actually went into the archive. And one of the things that really, when we thought about the relevance of Pride, we thought about how remarkable it was that year after year, although there was so much infighting from the very beginning about what Pride was even about and who should be running it, right? That people kept putting it on year after year after year. And the tremendous amount of work that goes into that. And we were sort of like, well, why do people keep doing this, right? Why do people keep re-upping? And we realized that there's some kind of love, right? That's part of it. And so Labor of Love as a title really comes from this way in which it is this really work-intensive thing, Pride, that is a largely thankless task and that lots of people fight about all the time. So, so from there we kind of went to thinking about how to construct it around some central themes, and we can talk a lot more about those themes coming up here. The other thing I want to say is that the GLBT Historical Society's museum, because it's connected to the archive, has this wonderful way of being a repository and a teller of our history. And because it does both things, we have this unique model, or relatively unique model, of community responsive production of historical knowledge. And just to give you one example of what that looks like, a lot of times when we do exhibits like this, we look in the archive and we pull lots of amazing stuff from the archive to show and tell our stories. But then we also recognize where there are gaps, right, in our archive, and where we could tell better stories if we had different kinds of archives. And so Amy will give an example of that later when she's talking about some of her favorite stuff from the show, where something actually came into our archive thanks to this exhibit. But it also serves as a place where we can do this kind of correction of the historical narrative that maybe the archive doesn't quite have right. So just to give you one example from the exhibit, we have these amazing index cards in the exhibit right now of Del Martin, who's one of the founders of the Daughters of Bilitis, and you know, a major powerhouse of lesbian political organizing across many, many decades, right? She was the MC of Pride for, or was one MC for several years. And we have these cards of her speech that we thought were from 1978 because they're in the 1978 folder, along with a photo of her speaking at that Pride with Harvey Milk in the background. So indeed, we know the photo is from 78. But we had somebody write to us and say, actually, it mentions something about the early gay chorus, and the way in which it describes the gay chorus indicates that the speech that she was giving was from 1981 on those index cards, right? And so we're actually going to be able to make the historical record better in our archive because of this community responsive work of back and forth, right? That is part of how we do the work of making history at the GLBT Historical Society. So there, I think I want to hand it over to Amy to talk a little bit more about the exhibit itself.
So I've been tasked to talk about the purpose of this exhibition. And for me, in particular, I think that we often hear that Pride, the first Pride was a riot, an uprising, right? And there's a lot of mythology around the beginnings of Pride. And so it was super important for me to kind of go back to the original source material and see what Pride really was like in the first 10 years. And, you know, as we're about to talk about, there were obviously a lot of contention and difficulties in the organization of Pride, right? But also the very act of organizing Pride was radical back then, in a way that today millennials and other young folks may not completely agree with or understand. I think when we look at Pride today, we don't think of it as something that's, you know, on the vanguard of queer radical movements. And so it was important for us to kind of go back and think about Pride and its original intention, and also the struggles that came about in the first 10 years. Like Don has talked about, our exhibits are about provoking critical thought, right? So part of what we want to do is have all of us think together of what history was and what that means for our future. So if we imagine a Pride in the 70s that was incredibly politically sort of driven, right? And we think that Pride is no longer politically driven. How can we go back to that earlier motive or day, if that's something that we want to do as a community? The other purpose of the exhibition, I think for me, was to really remind myself of the importance of Pride. I think that, you know, as I've become a middle-aged queer, Pride has the Pride Festival itself may not be as on top of my brain as other political and social movements. But still, I think with COVID this year, I missed Pride. I actually realized that as critical as I am about Pride and as exhausted as I can get around Pride, that there was something lost this year by not having a face-to-face Pride, not being able to be surrounded all by queers and only talk to queers on the weekend. And that's part of the reason I think that we live in the Bay Area, because we don't want to be surrounded by straight folks all the time. And so I think this exhibit for me was also a way to remind myself of the significance and importance of Pride, particularly for folks who are just coming out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. So now we're going to roll into looking at the 4 major sections of the exhibition with each of us as a lead curator. I did a couple of them. Amy did one and Dawn did a big one. So my 2 are at the start, so I'm going to roll right through them and then pass along to Amy. I'm going to see if I can get my screen sharing happening here. So we'll find out. Let's just see here. Come on, come up, baby. There's what I'm looking for. And share screen. There we go. I think we're in business now. So the first section that I was a curator on, we opened the exhibition with a section that asks a very basic question that many of us probably don't even think to ask anymore, which is, why does Pride even exist? Why was it being done? And particularly, what were people saying in those first 10 years about what this event was for? And what emerged pretty quickly was a kind of consensus that having a large, visible event with hundreds, soon thousands, soon tens of thousands of LGBTQ people in a wide range of diversity in a public place, claiming their own space in society, was a way of encouraging self-esteem among queer people, a way of insisting to the rest of our society that we belong here and we're not going to be invisible, and a way of demonstrating to elected officials and others in power that we were a constituency and that our concerns needed to be taken into account. That early purpose of Pride that emerged within the first 2 or 3 years, with everybody kind of agreeing on that, that's remained one of the basic fundamental purposes of the event. And so I'm just going to take a quick look at 3 items from this Why Pride section. The first one is a flyer that you're seeing on screen now. The first Pride in San Francisco in 1970, there was a small march of about 20 to 30 people on Polk Street called the Gay Liberation March. That was on Saturday, the 27th of June, 1970. And then the following day on Sunday, there was a picnic, a gay in high hippie talk in Golden Gate Park at Speedway Meadows. And this flyer is the one real piece of ephemera from that first Pride celebration in San Francisco. And I love it because there's so much going on here. Christopher Street, Gay Liberation Day, gay in, Stonewall riots, far fucking out. Okay, that tells you we're celebrating the first anniversary of Stonewall. You see 1 year later up there at the top. I also like that this flyer reminds us from the very beginning, Pride was a combination of protest and party. The march was put on by the Gay Liberation Front of San Francisco, and you'll notice down there in the lower right corner that for the picnic, the gay in, they redubbed themselves the Gay Celebration Front. I really love that little detail. And a couple of other quick details that we can look at here. One will see right in the middle at the lower part, a hand holding up a letter that says, "Dear folks, this sure has been one swell year, signed the Purple Hand." And this is a reference to a celebrated protest on October 31st, 1969. The San Francisco Examiner had run a series of articles that I'm going to try to find the exact title because it's so great, on, quote, "the dreary revels of SF's gay bars," unquote. So it was a series mocking gay social life and gay nightlife in San Francisco and treating it as something dismal and pathetic. And so a group of protesters showed up on a Friday afternoon in front of the San Francisco Examiner. A staff member from their printing press came out on the roof and dumped a bag of purple printer's ink all over them. And they left purple handprints all over the building and came to call the event the Friday of the Purple Hand. So here we're seeing struggles around media representation and media mockery and marginalization of queer people. We're claiming it back. The other one I like here, and it's particularly apposite for this picnic, off the Honda Hogs in one of the balloons. Honda Hogs were the San Francisco Police Department's motorcycle patrol in Golden Gate Park, which went around making sure men weren't picking up other men in the bushes and having sex with them there, and punishing them and arresting them. And the Honda Hogs showed up at this picnic, a reminder that a little picnic could be a radical queer event. The Honda Hogs showed up. One person who was there told me they were also called the Blue Meanies, and he had just taken LSD and decided to go home when the police showed up because he didn't want trouble. Followed by a Jeep, followed by mounted officers on horses who raided this picnic and proceeded to detain 7 people. They never formally arrested them. They just hauled them off to the police station for a number of hours. It was a routine way of the police directly punishing people without ever having to make charges stick. They could just disrupt your life and yank you out of it and put you in the police station for a few hours or overnight and then let you go and not have to do any paperwork or anything. Direct punishment. One of the organizers of the event told one of the underground papers in the Bay Area in its next issue about this raid, and it really reminds us about the thinking in the era. So what he said, his name was Leo Lawrence. And he said that, that the gathering was beautiful and peaceful until the police came. And he then talks a bit further about how peaceful it was. And then he adds, if they continue to persecute minorities like ours, we have no choice but armed revolution. Most people don't think of an organizer of San Francisco Pride saying, let us have our parade and our basic rights, or we'll have queer armed revolution. Pride was really something radical at the outset and was persecuted directly by the police. Let's take a quick look at the next one. Statement of purpose for Pride. Every year, the parade committee and organizers, except for that first year, would put out a statement of purpose. This one from 75, I think, lays out a couple of the basic concerns that we continue to see. So I mentioned this strategy of visibility for self-esteem, for social respect, and for political power. And here we have it stated quite simply. The more visible we are, the stronger we become. We also see that from the beginning, virtually, Pride worked very hard to recognize the intersectionality of queer experience and the importance of coalition building to produce political power for our movement. Here we see them saying, we call for gay persons to make a commitment to understand the struggle against all oppressions, help us secure the creation of a just, free, and loving society by eliminating sexism, ageism, racism, and elitism. Now, of course, those sentiments and those political principles needed to be put into practice, and that's where the challenges arrive, and Amy will be talking a little bit about how putting them into practice has produced a struggle that continues to this day. And finally, for this Why Pride section, we take a look at a letter from 1980 in the Bay Area Reporter by the Reverend Robert Humphreys, who had organized Pride in Los Angeles in 1970 and 71, and was one of the organizers in San Francisco in 1972. This letter is quite fascinating, and I urge you who haven't seen the exhibition yet to go and click on it, enlarge it, and read it in detail. It's quite intriguing. He refers to himself as being a founder of the first Pride in San Francisco. 72 was the first year where there was a big parade. So often people back then thought of it was the first one, not that little march in 1970. But what I particularly love about this is that he says something that I think we can still say, and that our exhibition sums up, and that every year we see in Pride. Let me find his quote here. He says that the parade is, quote, an exercise of gay community strength, unity, clout, foolishness, diversity, and outrageousness. The parade is the gay community for all the world to see, and if the world doesn't like what it sees, it can damn well look the other way, because we are beautiful, we are real, and we are not going away. I think he summed up the way the parade still functions to this day, particularly with that whole list of diversity, clout, outrageousness, foolishness. If he had added in disagreement, he would have had the whole list. Let's take a quick look at a couple of items from the next section that I was the lead on, which is the work of Pride. As Don mentioned, one of the things we noticed early on is how much work it is to put this thing on. And even very early on, it was an awful lot of work. We're looking at 2 Crawford Barton photos from 1973. The first parade in 70 had 20 to 30 people. In 1973, it had an estimated, let me make sure I've got my number right here, an estimated 42,000 people between the marchers and the people who watched and the people who went to the celebration at the end. That's a lot of growth in 3 years. And we see a little bit of what's going on there. I love the picture on the left. What we see is an African-American parade safety monitor with a giant walkie-talkie. Queers always love cutting-edge technology, but also 25 fabulous feather boas. It's work, and it was hard work, and it took a lot of people to do it, but they also wanted to have fun and do it with high spirits. And we really get a look at that. If you're a local history buff, that picture on the right, you see Brownies. That is Brownies Ace Hardware, still at the corner of Sacramento and Polk Street. And you can go and visit the site. It's lost its top 2 floors and is now just a 1-story building, but it's still there. And the parade there is on Sacramento Street. You're looking up Sacramento Street towards the west. A quick look at a figure some of you will recognize. Here we have Harvey Milk, ordinary citizen in 1975. He was a passionate amateur photographer, taking a picture of the Atlantis House car in the parade. And we put Harvey Milk in because in 1975, 1976, he was lobbying for two things. He was complaining that the local mainstream media, the Examiner, the Chronicle, were saying nothing about the parade in advance. Even though it was one of the city's biggest events by that point, it got no advance publicity. It'd be even bigger if the mainstream media would talk about it. He also was saying that unlike all the other major parades and cultural festivals at the time in San Francisco, that the Pride Parade got no funding from the city. And that remained true until 1978, when Harvey Milk was on the Board of Supervisors and the city finally started funding the parade and has done so ever since. Then a final quick look in the work of Pride. We have a section of several very boring looking pieces of paper with minutes and motions and sign-up lists. And we really wanted to include those to remind folks that these boring looking documents, probably documenting meetings that were incredibly tedious and interminable and boring as well, are the nuts and bolts of Pride. Behind the scenes, it's an enormous effort of governance, of management, of logistics, of applying for permits, of engaging in liaison with the police, of doing advertising and promotion, of coming up with merchandise you can sell, of soliciting volunteers to take part. And part of that also was this constant effort to address questions of representation and inclusion, with each year concerns raised about Pride not being representative and inclusive enough or at all, and with each year new efforts to try to address those concerns and new struggles over power sharing, who would get to address them and how. I think Amy will talk a little bit about those as well. And that's it for my couple of sections. I'll now pass it along to Amy for the next section in the exhibition. See if I can get rid of screen sharing. There we go.
Whoops, that's me. I'm trying to talk. Sorry. While you're getting this set up, there's a question in the Q&A, Gerard, you might want to check out. I think you have a more specific surgical knowledge of the use of the word pride versus liberation and kind of when and where that's appearing. I want to take a look at that.
Right, thanks. As long as Amy's still getting her screen sharing set up, what I can say is that the name Pride was not used as the official name for the event in San Francisco until 1981, so the year after we're looking at. It was called initially Gay Liberation Day, Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day, Christopher Street West, Gay Freedom Day through much of the period of time we're looking at, then Gay and Lesbian Freedom Day, and finally Pride. But in all of those early statements from the very beginning, including the quotes from one of the first organizers, Leo Lawrence, from 1970, people talk about Pride. They use that term, but it isn't the primary one, and it isn't the official name of the event.
Thank you, Gerard. And I appreciate all the detail and the backstory. I'm just going to talk about a few items from my section, Pride Fights, and then I have a favorite item from one of the other sections as well. So part of the reason that this section, Pride Fights, was so fascinating and compelling to me was that I'm on the board of San Francisco Pride currently, and it's definitely a place where there's a lot of challenging conversations. And many people come to participate and voice the ways in which they want to see Pride change. And I began to wonder if Pride was always like this, or if it was something that was unique to right now, with the very specific issues around police involvement, increased corporatization, right, and better inclusivity. And so I embarked on this section, and I have a couple of pieces that I particularly like. I've shared this Pride 1972 program cover previously in another panel as well. And part of what really draws me to this is the political nature in which the logo is designed. So we can see that, Black power and sort of the fist raised in opposition is definitely indicates a relationship with the Black Power movement and Black Panthers. The butterfly also, maybe there's some old timers on this call that can talk to this, speak to this, but the butterfly to me represents currently mariposa consciousness. So it really, to me, indicated sort of a broader multiracial kind of consciousness around what gay pride should be. An art historian later texted me after I shared this image on a different panel and noted that the fist is super phallic, right? And then with the butterfly wings around the fist, that it's super vaginal. Like if you can imagine this image in its entirety as a vagina, with the fist actually being the clitoris. And so it serves like multiple purposes, right? In terms of indicating sex positivity within the queer community, alliances, if not overlaps, with other cultural nationalist movements at the time. And even if Pride in its early stages was not even close to being perfect in terms of inclusivity, the logo to me indicates a real effort that we don't see necessarily visible in today's more commercialized Pride. This second image was the same. Oh, so Paula Lichtenberg has put in a comment about the Butterfly Brigade as a gay anti-violence organization. So thank you very much for that, Paula. This image is actually an image of a protest that the San Francisco Gay Liberation Alliance did within the Pride parade. It was a protest against the Imperial Court in 1974. This was super notable for me as a child who grew up in the 1980s because as I came out, I always saw the Imperial Court as being central to gay life, right, to gay male life in particular. And I never doubted its legitimacy or its presence or the ways in which it represented gay male culture in particular. I always thought it was like, in some ways, the crown jewel, so to speak, of gay male culture, both in its embrace of the Imperial Court and also philanthropy. And so to see folks protesting it as a site of elitism, which is ideologically against being queer, was fascinating to me. This is a memo written by, let me just move this here, sorry. This is a memo written by the Gay Freedom Day Committee in 1973. And it's interesting because it discusses how there's a competing Pride event by the Gay Alliance led by Ray Brochures. So today, there's no competing events in terms of Pride, right, in the contemporary period. But in its origins, there appears to have been other groups that were trying to gain control of Pride and throw the Pride event on the West Coast. There's also mention of how the committee has addressed concern around the absence of women on the committee. And the committee also asks parade goers to use signs, but not use obscenities, and to please use discretion. What is not on this slide, but is available for your viewing at the exhibit, at the online exhibit, is a letter written 11 months later from Steve Ginsberg, who's both the coordinator of Gay Freedom Week and the chairman of the parade. And in this letter that he writes 11 months later, he actually resigns from his role. He accuses more than 10 queer organizations that he calls collectively as the, quote, gay mafia, of undermining him. And these include BAR, TGSF, SIR, Society for Individual Rights, the Alice B. Toklas Democratic Club, and Daughters of Bilitis. In this resignation letter, he declared, quote, I resign and quit. There is no gay freedom. I will not rim. Fuck you all and don't bother to call me. My phone is disconnected. The last thing I'd like to share from from Pride Fights is a recording of Barbara Cameron speaking in 1981 about Gay Freedom Day in 1980. So I'm just gonna stop this share and then share the audio clip. Oops, sorry, folks.
That's okay. While we're waiting for this to get up and running, thanks everybody for the wonderful comments that are coming in. It's great to see stuff from Jacob Hale down in LA and Peter Stein, the senior programmer at Frainline. So it's great to see all the different folks, Paula, all the folks that are chiming in here. Keep it up.
Okay, I'm going to begin now.
That's what the parade is all about.
Last year there was another woman on stage who was not invited, and she delivered a speech that was so passionate and so moving and so caring that I almost wept. She is now the co-chair of this Lesbian and Gay Pride Parade. How about a wonderful welcome for a very hard worker and a wonderful sister, Barbara Cameron. I would not have thought, as I spoke from this stage last year as an unauthorized speaker, that I would again be here, but serving in the capacity of co-chair, and this year I would be an authorized speaker. The focus of my speech last year was unity. Unity does not necessarily describe the lesbian and gay men's community, but unity will become imperative as the philosophies of the conservative right become realized through oppressive legislation such as the Family Protection Act. The gender fighting that divides the lesbian and gay men's community will become meaningless as what divides us from them becomes dangerously clearer. Questions of whether there are too many third world speakers, big mouth dykes, or too many disabled persons on stage are the wrong questions. The questions are, is our movement and who represents us going to be defined by a handful of our community who wish us to assimilate into the great American melting pot, or is our movement going to be defined by all of our voices, all of our colors, and still retain the integrity, uniqueness, and courage that is us? Will we allow our movement to be compromised and sold out? Someone gave me advice this week about what I should not say in my speech. That advice was essentially, do not be making noise or trouble up on stage. There's nothing to complain about because we have it made in San Francisco. That piece of advice, although for one person probably echoes opinions from our community, that it is just too damn depressing, a real downer to have political speakers on stage. Well, let me tell you what is depressing, what is a downer. A downer is having a so-called religious leader publicly state that lesbians and gay men should be executed. A downer is getting queer bashed in San Francisco. My friend Greg Day has adequately, in my opinion, described our San Francisco community as one big closet. San Francisco is not a mystical fairy dyke island that happily floats in the fog on the bay.
And just a reminder for folks, Barbara Cameron is the co-founder of Gay American Indians along with Randy Burns. I have one last slide that I'd just like to share with you. Is this working, folks? Do you see? I hope you're not seeing my calendar.
We were seeing it for a second, but it went away. You needed to put then the slide presentation into slide presentation. I know. It's terrible to have to do our own tech.
Okay, how's that? Better?
It's okay, but it now needs to be made into a, yeah, okay.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is the last slide that I just would like to show for you. It's from, it's one of my favorites from Big Gay Family. And when Don was going through images and materials for his section, we had difficulty finding representation for, a number of very specific groups. One of them was Asian Americans. And so we were able to find a series of pictures from Pride right around 1980. This is Ken Hamai in the center, and this is his first Pride in San Francisco. And it's super moving to me, precisely just for the fact that there's so few images of Asian Americans in the first 10 years of Pride. And when we found this, it was just so fabulous and heartwarming, and it made my heart sort of melt around the edges. Thank you.
Okay, I think am I up next? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. On to the
Okay.
family.
All right. So, so my section that I worked on was the largest of the sections, and we had sort of decided that it deserved a broader scope than everything else, just because there was so much amazing celebratory community-based work and marching and fabulosity that is happening in those first 10 years of Pride. And we also recognized increasingly that when we thought about those first 10 years of Pride, one of the things that was made very clear to us was that the diversity of our community, which in everyday life for many parts of our LGBTQ plus community were not necessarily on display to one another, came together in this amazing civic cultural event of Pride. So I'm gonna show you some of my favorites from this section. Make sure I got this. Okay. Now I'll be the clunky one. Here we go. Okay. The first thing I want to show is this remarkable image from Gay Voice, which was the Gay Activist Alliance News in 1972. And you can see there's Reverend Ray Broshears, a controversial figure, if ever there was one, in San Francisco queer politics, who led the early parades and then tried to lead a counter parade when event when he was sort of pushed out of power in the early years of organizing the Gay Liberation Day. But what I love most about this image is the way in which 5,500 seems like such an exciting accomplishment. And indeed, it was a huge accomplishment to get that many people to openly come out and celebrate together. And if you look through the crowd, it's hard to make out in this image. And maybe this is a good time to actually mention that we were incredibly limited in how we ended up ultimately putting this exhibit together online, because we had taken pictures on our phones of many of these archival objects to be able to plot out how we were going to do the real exhibit, right? The real in-place exhibit. And then the archives, like everything else, had to be shut down when COVID-19 came about. And so it's really to the credit of the designers of this online exhibit that they were able to take our crappy phone images that were not intended at all to be high quality and turn them into the kinds of images they have. But anyway, the quality of this image is a little sketchy, but you can see when you look through the crowd that, yeah, there's a lot of white people there, but there's a tremendous amount of diversity in the crowd as well. And how thrilling it must have been for so many LGBTQ people who in that moment probably had never been, certainly had never been in a gathering of queer people this large, right? And how powerful that must have felt for them. So I also want to show then a video here. And so I have to figure out now how to do this. Let me see. Hold, please. Okay. And so this, uh-oh. Can you see my, no. Can you see the crud? Hold on. Yes, now you can. Okay, so there are several places in the exhibit where I do hope that you'll go ahead and check out the audio or the video components that we have there. But this is one thing that's in the Big Gay Family, and it's from the Blue Light Collective, and it's from 1973, and I'm just going to show it in its entirety. It's only about 3 minutes long.
H.L. Perry, our parade marshal, said that one day a year we put aside our differences and walk down the street together. And that's a very deep statement, because I feel that the ultimate goal of all gay people would be gay liberation, gay freedom, gay revolution, whatever you want to call it, like a better, easier, more comfortable life for us as gay people. And there are lots of differences. We cover, every imaginable aspect of culture is covered by gay people. We're of all colors, classes, and ethnic backgrounds, and all different, sorts of things. And the differences are not going to be solved in a day. They're not going to be solved in a year. I don't know if they're going to be solved. It goes beyond just being gay. It goes into different classes, racism, definitely sexism within our own community. But one day a year, if we all march, whether you think you're marching together or if you just want to march alone as a gay person, but I think everybody should get out and march and show our, like we are gay people who want our gay freedom, our human freedom.
It's going pretty well. We're almost completed. Has the parade gotten bigger since the beginning? Definitely. I would say at least by about 5,000 to 10,000.
Today has been one of the most beautiful days I have seen.
It is.
It has really been great if people all over would get together in groups, knowing groups. We would have no more wars, fight, and we'd all get together. And that's all it is.
What's your name?
Lisa. There aren't any women here. That's all.
What happened?
What?
What happened? Do you think the women aren't here?
I think there's a lot of hostility, between the men and the women here, and they're just not together. And I know for one, we're 3 from Los Angeles, and we really feel, like we're our sisters. We feel lost.
So there you can see that there's a variety of things that are happening in that clip, but they all articulate something about what we call our big gay family, in that there's this desire for unity across difference and diversity. There's also a call for a kind of solidarity and coalition, but also, like all families, there's some things that are really dysfunctional and complicated about it, and the ways in which it struggles to articulate itself as a family, as a community, is something that can only happen when we all attempt to come together, right, to coalesce. And I love that woman's comment at the end in that regard. A couple other images I want to show that really just emphasize this tension, right, in big gay family between us all coming together as a community and the ways in which our difference needs to be marked in this moment when we all come together. One is from 1973, this image. It's the only one we found that mentions asexual specifically, so we were very excited to find this old sort of contact sheet, and that's why there's a red X on it, right? Gay, straight, bisexual, asexual, all God's children need love, and that's from 1973, from that that same one that we just saw. And then also in 1977, what is perhaps my favorite image of the entire exhibit is the Third World Gay Caucus, and they came together under a banner that was not simply Black or Latinx or API, right, or Native American, but staking out this way in which people who have been marginalized by American settler colonialism, right, and imperialism might come together under the notion of third world, which was used a lot in 70s language, right, radical language. But the ways in which there's this way that they're celebrating both their coming together as a collective experience of what were then soon afterwards called people of color, right? In solidarity with one another. But then also the ways in which they're asserting, I love the sign that says gay rights are human rights, right? So while it's talking about difference, it's also talking about sort of universalism and universal values and universal rights and the ways in which LGBTQ people should be a part of that. A couple of other quick things I just want to point out. Families were there from very early on. And we have this wonderful speech that was given by Bernice Becker of parents of gays in the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's a few places where we have these kinds of wonderful speeches. And something that I really like about it is that she talks about how for families of gay people, there's an experience of coming out, right? And first is sort of feeling distraught and isolated when you have to acknowledge that your children are gay, right? And then you move into a place of going to rap groups, as she calls them, right? Support groups or places where you seek out counseling and sort of peer connection with other people who are in a similar sort of situation as you. And then finally, how that transforms into a kind of politicization. And I think one of the things that's important about us being a big gay family and pride is the ways in which coming together out of desire for community and belonging mobilizes a lot of people into political organization, and that's a key part of what happens. And of course, there were also queer people with families, right? Queer people who had children, right? And here we have this amazing and wonderful picture from 1977 from Crawford Barton, who was so great at capturing so much about the vitality of queer life in San Francisco in the 1970s. And then I will end up by just showing another couple great images that embody this kind of belonging through difference. The gay American Indian contingent that Barbara Cameron was most certainly a part of. It was at the 1978 Gay Freedom Day Parade. And you can see that there's a mixture of traditional or ceremonial garb and contemporary style, right, and fashion that was mixed together there. And so I love that picture for sort of the combination of those things. And then to end on a slightly cranky note, you have this wonderful flyer from 1979 where queer youth are essentially coming together, right? The sign there says youth liberation, right on fags and dykes in high school, and has a critique mounted within it about the ways that adult gay rights bills oftentimes the Save Our Children campaigns, right, of Anita Bryant and others were often sort of suggesting that repealing adult gay rights bills would somehow save children from the homosexual agenda. But at the same time, they turn and then say gay adults sell out our rights by accepting straight positions that young people have no sexuality and by excluding us from the larger gay community, right? And so queer youth are saying that they need to be visible in this parade as a way of speaking back not just to the religious right, but speaking back to skittish adult gays who want to either control, contain, or invisibilize the existence of queer youth. Oh, I have to stop sharing, right?
So we're actually approaching our closing. We do have one more section on our online exhibit, and it's a section where you actually can contribute and participate in how you might think of the future of Pride. It's super important for us as public historians for us to be thinking about how history is relevant today. We wanted to both be not just lessons from the past per se, but how does the past help us rethink our future as well as our present, right? And I really do think that in some ways, thinking about our past helps us rethink all the assumptions that we have today about our present, that things are changeable, that we can be active agents in making something, work or appear differently. And so we encourage all of you to both enjoy the exhibit, be able to click on the documents and look at all the little details, and then think about what you would like to see as the future of Pride. Don,
Don, we were going to hand off to you to do the bit of a pitch about going and seeing the actual exhibition. And
Sorry, I just got a message from Lee saying that I'm talking too loud, so I'm distracted by the private chat. Okay, that's typical even without a microphone. So, I just wanted to close out by saying that of course, we're thrilled that you're all here. Thank you so much for coming and attending. It's important that you spread the word about this. During the summer of 2020, we anticipated, 10,000 people coming through the museum and seeing this exhibit. And of course, we can't really have that. So spread the word, tell people about it, please. And then finally, if you like what you see and you like the work that the GLBT Historical Society does, we really urge you to support us, either by becoming members, or if you are a member, by giving another donation. Especially during this time, it's crucial that community-based repositories of our memory continue on and continue to produce the kind of programming and exhibition that only we can do, right? Major institutions that are non-queer are increasingly doing these kinds of queer shows, which is fabulous, and we want more of those. But there's the very intimate kind of knowledge that community-based history can produce that really needs to be supported and sustained. So I hope that you can find your way over to the donate button at some point as well.
Thank you. We very much encourage people now, if you have comments, memories, questions, please pop up in the chat. We're monitoring that. We're hoping to have a bit of a discussion at this point, if that's possible. It's always a bit challenging in this kind of setting, but we very much welcome it. And I'll add one thing to what Dawn said, which is at the end of the online exhibition, there is actually a participatory section where we invite you to answer the question that was posed in a 1980 poster from Pride. I'll see if I can share it here. Let's just see now. Well, it's not letting me see what I want to see.
While you're doing that, I'll say that there's a variety of questions coming in already. So the first one is, what role did Pride play in shaping as well as, shaping identity as well as expressing it? Did Pride play a role in defining and popularizing identity terms?
Amy, would you perhaps like to take that one on?
Sure, I can try. I mean, I do think that there's probably folks who are actually participants here that, not just us, but obviously folks who are here who could probably answer that question a lot better. I mean, I do think going through the materials that many of the identity terms were reflective of the time and spoke to sort of the solidification of these identities across different movements. It also signaled that it wasn't just coalition building. There were third world people, for example, who were actually gay, right? For example, so it's not just about building coalitions, but it's actually that folks with multiple identities are actually existent within these movements and creating terms for themselves around their identity. I don't know, Dawn, if you were able to talk about why we decided on big gay family versus big queer family.
I didn't, and we do mention it briefly in the exhibit, but queer was not a word that was used in the same way back then as this kind of umbrella term for our community, whereas gay was. And so while certainly to today's ear, big gay family might sound like a hostile kind of closure down on all sorts of kinds of identities. At the time, it was this word of expansive possibility, even as it was a contested term, right? There's the battle over whether or not gay includes lesbian, and of course, lesbian and gay becomes the language of the Freedom Day shortly thereafter. So that's why we decided to use it that way. But I think absolutely, if you think about the ways in which any of us individually, collectively, all of us who are here, experience pride, pride becomes this space where your little a personal identity or preference or orientation or desire suddenly becomes part of this large public ocean of desires and pleasures and identities, right? And I think that that awakens a lot of us into thinking about ourselves as connected to many different kinds of identities and desires that we wouldn't have necessarily thought about being connected to before. So I think those pride is very important as an engine in that way. I also see that we have something here from Alan, I think, right? Saying we left out sex. I want to assure you we did not leave out sex. Although we did have one kind of famous drunk dude who was naked that we had a photo of, and I guess he didn't make it into the online show I'm not exactly sure how the chop happened there. But
he was definitely in the brick and mortar exhibit.
Yeah.
Along with more boobs, naked breasts.
Right. So we do have some breasts, and we do have some like hunky dudes and stuff in the online show.
And it wasn't just political breasts. There were some also more lesbian erotic breasts, right, Dawn?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll jump in and second what Don said. What you see in the online exhibition is a selection of what would have been in the exhibition in the museum, and in part the selection was made on which things were actually a good enough quality photo to be produced into a file that could be put online and understood, and which things we just had a kind of reference photo that wouldn't work. So we were given some forceful editing by the pandemic, which we hope to improve as we move into the actual exhibition. The other thing I can say is that the themes we selected, in part, we wanted to keep the show at a size that would be approachable by people. That's why we decided to only do the first 10 years. And it turned out even with the first 10 years, the number of themes we would have liked to do would have been another 15 of them. So this is just a first show about those first 10 years. Next time around, we might do a whole show about all the hot sex that was had and all the fights that were going on about whether anybody should be allowed to know about that, because it might make us look bad.
And of course, there was debates about, sorry to jump on you there were debates about nudity and whether nudity, right, should be in the parade or not. And then I want to also just briefly say that there's, like in terms of the other kinds of things that we thought we could do, we thought about doing things around policing, we thought about doing things around consumerism, right, and commercialization. There were so many other topics that we could have there, but it looks like Ren is here with us. Hi, Ren.
Hi, guys.
You want to share?
I was listening, trying to concentrate on everything that you were showing, and I didn't hear any mention of the Radical Fairies. Do you have anything on them? Anyone?
Gerard, can you answer that question?
I will jump on that. If I recall directly, the Radical Dig Fairies were founded in 1979. Is that correct, Ren? And so they really weren't particularly visible yet as Radical Fairies. Conversely, looking all the way back, for example, to that butterfly with a fist that Amy showed, a number of the fairy consciousness and the notion that putting forward what might have been dismissed as effeminacy or as forms of masculinity that represented weakness, I'm using all those terms very advisedly, that in fact there was a very strong presence of a consciousness around rejecting traditional societal norms of masculinity, traditional societal norms of productivity, the domination of the urban gay scene, and so on, that's visible throughout those first 10 years. The very beginning, the first parade of 20 to 30 people was largely hippies and hair fairies. Hair fairies were men who used various effeminate signifiers in their clothing and their hairstyles. Some of them later became transgender women. Some of them later became effeminate men. Some of them later became gay men. It was a category that doesn't exist anymore. But there was a kind of fairy consciousness that was really animating the early parades, particularly, even though the group did not yet exist and the name did not yet exist.
I used to host fairy meetings at my house. Do you know something about that, Don?
I'm just saying, yay.
Well, we'd have a bunch of people come to my apartment, and they'd do a drum circle and, you know, incense and chant. And I remember that one topic that was always brought up was if we should be allowing women in our group. And being all gay men, I really wished for more women and more female visibility. That was a constant theme of our discussions. And I wanted to bring people together more, so.
That's great, thank you so much. And I think that actually the inclusion or the ways in which women and men might come together. Charles has a question in the Q&A. Wasn't there a mandate starting in 1978 that there be both a gay man and a lesbian as co-chairs of the parade committee? Gerard, did you want to take that one? Was it 78 that happened?
I'll be frank, I don't have the exact date in mind, because there was a constant struggle around governance and representativity and power sharing within governance in the parade. So I wouldn't want to say that it was 1978 without double checking the sources, but certainly that was a constant discussion, as we already saw in some of the things that we looked at here.
And we do see it actually in the source material that there is a mandate to have two co-chairs, one of different genders.
So we have another, Fred is in the Q&A talking about how as socially and politically relevant early gay liberation parades were, many of us just wanted to meet other queers and hook up, whether it was in the bushes at the Speedway Meadows, the after parties. Sex was always a huge part of this. And I want to say that in answer to that, certainly we talked about thinking about the Gay Liberation Day as something that we would think of more holistically as like the other events that were going on around it. And it quickly became too unwieldy for us in terms of this particular exhibit to think about that. But I think, Fred, you're onto something there that, of course, for lots of queer people, especially once they sort of gotten over the exhilaration of watching a 5-hour parade. It's those after parties and other events that might be more exciting to them. But again, those are also events where we kind of all come together, right, for the parade and for the festival, and then we all sort of tend to retreat to our particular sort of areas of interest or identity in those kind of after party events. And so there is something special still about the parade and the festival in terms of its democratic spirit, I guess.
I'll just jump in and say that this question, some of the other questions we've heard, some of the stories that we've started hearing from people who attended these parades in the first 10 years, including I've now heard from 3 people who were in the march of 20 to 30 people in 1970. Wow, I've heard from 10% of the people in the parade that year. That there are incredible stories. And I have to say, I came into this exhibition saying, we're going to try to do an exhibition about pride. There's a float, there's another float. It just didn't really engage me very much until we started talking about it. And now I realize, in fact, that it's this incredibly rich lens through which to see so many things about our community. I'd love to see some living history panels with participants from the various years. We could have a whole living history panel on fantastic dirty sex stories from the parade, from the first 10 years. I'd love that. And for us going forward, if we could do some, if you'll pardon the expression, start an oral history around not only the organizing, but simply the participating in the parade. Why did you go? Where did you come from? What impact did it have on you in those early years? There really isn't a lot of documentation on that. And that's also documentation we don't find in the archives unless we do an oral history initiative to really gather those stories and see the patterns in them. So I'm hoping more work comes out of this exhibition that really will give us a richer understanding.
So it looks like we've got a couple of other Q&A things here. Jacob asks, how early do the controversies over leather SM presence in SF Pride begin? And then we also have a question about the role of bisexuals at Pride in this period. Do either of you want to take on either of those?
You're welcome to take it, Don.
I will say that there's this tension around respectability versus letting it all hang out. That is a tension from the beginning, but that San Francisco's parade tends to move more toward letting it all hang out. But there are controversies about the exploitative nature, so as they are characterized, of both drag and, as Amy pointed out, the imperial court and leather SM, but not to the extent that they get excluded from or banned from Pride, as far as I know, in the 1970s. The role of bisexuals in Pride at the time was hard for us to document, actually, from the GLBT Historical Society archives. So if folks have materials around bi participation in the Gay Freedom Day Parade and festivals, that would be great to see. I do know that the Bisexual Center, which was formed in San Francisco in 1976, did have a contingent in the parade. We just didn't have any photographic or documentary evidence of that at the archives.
Donna, I think we did see like a few sort of posters that people were carrying, obviously declaring bisexuality, right? We also saw a number of images from the parade in the later part of the 70s, folks in leather, like we had a blurry kind of dykes on bikes kind of picture of some dykes in leather. So we had some of those images as well, right? Do we remember that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was plenty of leather on display. I think Jacob's question is more, were there ways for that there were certain sectors of, for example, the lesbian feminist movement who were trying to shut down or marginalize or at least protest the existence of leather SM at Pride.
If I could just jump in, what I would say about that is we didn't see any documentation of that,
Right.
Based on what Don said, what Amy said, and what I just said there. Another thing that surprised us was we went in kind of thinking, well, of course, there'll be film footage and pictures of everything at every parade from virtually the beginning. And it turns out that's not the case, that we don't have a picture of every contingent in every parade, or even across the decade, that we don't have video or film footage of every parade in the archives collection. We don't have any signs or items of clothing or props that people used in those first 10 years of the parade. Even at the documentary level, we're missing enormous amounts of material. San Francisco Pride's own archives do not start until 1979. And we looked at them and we had already found everything we wanted. So I want to make a call to people who are taking part. If you were involved in those first 10 years, you know anyone who was, you have photographs, you have film, you have documentation, signage, we're very, very eager to add that to the collection and build a much richer archival record on those first 10 years of Pride. And don't presume that the remaining 40 years after that we have everything. We certainly don't, and we're eager to have more. So please check your closet. You're not in there, but there might be a box of great archival material.
I do want to just make a note that we did pretty much found all the covers for the Pride booklet, basically, program for the first 10 years. And one thing that struck us that was, I think, disturbing for all three of us was that many of them actually used sort of images of American nationalism. I would say like 5 of the programs used images of American nationalism, like a bicentennial flag, and I'm sure it was, you know, appropriated as a site of irony, like gay folks should be included in America as well. But we did notice a distinct tie between American nationalism and the way Pride was projected in the program covers.
Jacob, I wish I had an answer, and I hope one of the other two does, but I actually don't think they do, based on the archival materials that we looked through. When was the first organized trans presence at SF Pride? I'm guessing in the 1980s, but that's a guess.
I think the complication is to pose the question, what do we mean by organized trans presence?
Yeah.
In the 1970s, the extent to which we had transgender organizing in a recognizable form that would fit that label and might march in the parade. Certainly the very first parade with hair fairies in it had a recognizable trans presence in it. And there was a real overt claiming of that presence. But in those early years as well, the use of the term drag and thinking about drag as a form of public presentation often overlapped with transgender identities in ways that we no longer recognize. So it's really that we're looking into a time period that predates our current thinking in a way that would require some very sophisticated asking of the question and analysis. I think we would find that there was a major presence. It just isn't as familiar to us because it wasn't organized the same way as it is now.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the imperial court as well, obviously. There's a kind of blurring between gay male and trans that's happening in the 1970s in the imperial court as well. And I think the imperial court's very present. Amy, you were going to say something, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so in Steve Ginsberg's resignation letter, he actually does mention TGSF, which today is Transgender San Francisco. I don't know if that acronym back then in 1973 is the same TGSF as the one today. But
it's Tavern Guild.
Oh, it's Tavern Guild? Okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So that's the thing that I was just wondering about. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Other questions from folks? I'm trying to look at both the chat and the Q&A at the same time here.
Looks like we have no further questions, comments coming in, and we're getting on towards our closing time at 7:30. I think this is a great moment to turn back to you, Amy and Dawn, and ask if you have some summarizing thoughts, some general questions you'd like to raise, some encouraging you'd like to do. How would we like to wrap up here?
I'll just say one thing, which is that this is not our first show that we've done together. And I want to say publicly, as I would if we were doing this at an event at the museum itself, that it is an ongoing joy to work with both of you. You both have such a generous spirit, but also a critical, intersectional, political commitment to doing this history well and doing justice to this history in a way that both tells the stories of the past, but also opens up the past so that we can imagine greater worlds that make more lives livable in the present and future. So it's an honor to work with you again on this, and thank you for that.
I think I'd just like to underscore that there are more than a handful of historians who are writing about Pride, not just in San Francisco, but across the nation. And so we've gathered an informal list of scholars who are working on Pride history, but I really want to encourage you, if this is a topic of interest for you, to look them up. The three of us here, we are not specialists in Pride per se, but we are invested in queer history, and we want to make it as accessible to the public as possible. And so for those who want a deeper dive into Pride history, I encourage you to look up those historians as well.
I'll follow up and second what Dawn said, and jumping off of what Amy said, also use this as a moment in closing to, again, encourage people to actively support the work of the GLBT Historical Society Museum and Archives. The history of LGBTQ history and of organizations like ours is one of my real areas of research, and I've done work in a number of countries on that. And what I'd like to say is that we are doing something unique. The Historical Society's work cannot be replaced by university libraries or mainstream museums or academic departments. We have a distinctive role to play bridging academic history, traditional historical institutions, and our own community where the deepest knowledge and wisdom comes from our experience, our memories, and our own ways of questioning and using the past. That work will only keep happening if we support this marvelous organization. And like all such small nonprofits, it's facing challenges in this difficult moment. So if you can step up with another $5 or $10 or a big giant check, or just spread the word about our events and our exhibitions, your support will make these kinds of community conversations where we all get together and deepen our understanding and build knowledge by interacting with one another. So please join us in doing your part to help keep this great organization thriving and growing. Dawn, Amy, anything you'd like to add? Lee?
Yeah, I just wanted to come on board to say hello and to let everybody know that we thank you for participating. We thank you to all of our wonderful curators for this exhibit. If you haven't gone to the website to check it out, please do. It's a wonderful journey, and these folks did so much wonderful work. And again, consider becoming a member of the Historical Society. And we can also, if you are interested in getting a transcript of the chat that happened today, since there were so many wonderful comments in the chat in Zoom, you can email info@glbthistory.org. Thank you.